Hey everybody, Bob here, and when I left you last week we were talking about the diminished scale, and I showed you a fingering for the diminished scale, and hope you've been working on that. And we talked about how easy it is to memorize because it's the same pattern repeating over and over again, and that was simply 1 3 4 1 2 4 1 3 4 1 2 4 1 3 4 1 2 4, remembering to move back one fret once we hit the third string from wherever our the fourth string from wherever our starting point might happen to be. And had a couple of questions about how you name this scale. And the diminished scale is typically thought of in two fashions. It's either a half step, whole step diminished scale, or a whole step, half step diminished scale. And either one is really a valid way to think about it. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more here in a second. What I showed you actually is a half step, or a whole step, half step. I'm sorry, get my half steps and whole steps mixed up here. A whole step, half step, because we're starting on A flat and we're going to B flat, which is a whole step, then it's a half step, then a whole step, etc., etc. And that could be thought of as an A flat, whole half diminished. But the way we're going to use this scale, I mentioned last week we're going to talk about how Robben Ford uses this scale. And he actually thinks of it in terms of it being a half step, whole step. So what we're going to do is we're just going to tack the G on back here at the beginning in the third fret. So now we're going to go G, A flat, and then everything else is just exactly the same from that point on. And now because we've gone from G to A flat, we are doing now a half step first, and then a whole step, and then a half step, then a whole step. So it's really they're pretty much the same scale. It just depends on which note you consider the starting note. And if we consider the G the starting note, now we're doing a G half whole diminished instead of an A flat whole half diminished. So don't get too caught up in the naming thing. The way we're going to use it, another way to think about it, is that you could play the diminished scale that's a half step higher than the root of the chord that you're talking about. And we're going to be doing this thing over a G7 chord today in a couple of different ways. So before we get to doing it on the track, I just want to say a couple of things here quickly. When you're soloing, if you listen to good soloists, there's a good blend between tension, notes that create tension, and release. Now this scale is going to create some tension, and the reason it's going to do that is because it contains notes that don't really work against the G7 chord. So like the A flat is a flat 9, and the B flat is a sharp 9. The G, of course, is the root of the chord, so we got flat 9, sharp 9. The B is the third of the chord. And then we get to D flat, which is a flat 5. And then we got the fifth, which is D. E is the sixth. And then F is the flat 7 in the chord. And then we're back to G again. So the three notes, the three outside notes, are the A flat, which is the flat 9, the B flat, which is the sharp 9, and the D flat, which is the flat 5. So the first thing I want you to do is, and if you don't understand any of that, don't worry about it. Just learn to apply the scale. You can learn the theory stuff later. But what I want you to do first is I want you to get used to hearing the sounds of these notes against just the G7 chord. And try to get your ear used to the sounds, because they're going to sound a little funny, as you're going to hear in just a second. So I'm going to put the G7 track on. I'm just going to play the scale up and down a little bit. And I want you to do the same thing just to get used to the sound. And then we're going to talk about how Robben Ford uses this scale in a blues progression. So kind of a three-part lesson today, if you will. So I'll be right back with just the G7 backing track. Now in this little segment here, I've got a backing track. It's just simply a G7 chord over and over again. So we're going to listen to how these notes sound against the G7 chord. And again, what I want you to do is just get comfortable with the sound of this scale. It's going to sound a little, it's going to tweak your ear a little bit because it's not inside the whole way. So let's hear what it sounds like against just a G7 chord and listen to those outside notes. So you can hear I have moments of here when it really gets out there, and then moments when it comes back in because I'm hitting the notes in the chord. That's a good, nice inside sounding note. But I hit there, and that's definitely, it's going to tweak your ear a little bit. So just short and sweet, I just wanted you to hear the sound of the scale against the backing track. And now we're going to move on to part 3, and what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how we're going to apply this thing against the blues. So I got to set things up again here, and I'll be back with that in just a second. Okay, to wrap things up in this lesson on the diminished scale, we're going to talk about how Robben Ford applies this particular scale against the blues progression. And if we got a blues in the key of G, a typical 12-bar blues would be G7 for a bar, C7 for a bar, and then back to G7 for 2 bars, and then C7 for 2 bars. And what Robben Ford does in that section there where it's G7 for 2 bars and C7 for 2 bars, on that second bar of G, he plays the diminished scale to lead into the C7 chord. So it creates tension. Remember we talked about tension earlier and release. And so that's how he creates tension, and then it releases when he hits the 4 chord. So what I did is I put a track together. It goes 2 bars of G7, 2 bars of C7 over and over again. So in that first bar of G7, we're going to play just a minor pentatonic, and then in the second bar, we're going to play the diminished scale. And then in the third bar, when it hits the C7 chord, we're going to go back to the minor pentatonic scale. So we're going minor pentatonic for a bar, diminished, and then back to the minor pentatonic again. And it's going to loop for you over and over again. And in order to make it even simpler, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just concentrate on the first 4 strings. I'm just going to play the diminished scale here on the first 4 strings, and likewise with the pentatonic scale. I'm not going to go down here into the lower notes just yet. And you can try that if you want, but again, I'm going to try to simplify it a little bit just by playing up here on the first 4 strings. And this works really well because even though in the key of G, in the blues, the G is the 1 chord and the C is the 4 chord, if we were thinking of the key of C, G would be 5 and C would be 1, so it's a 5-to-1 relationship. And that's a really important thing to know in music, all the 5-to-1 relationships. You can get a lot of mileage out of that. This is a little music theory stuff. If you don't really understand it, don't worry about it too much for now. Hopefully it'll inspire you to learn some. Just work on the application. So here we go, diminished scale usage in the blues, a la Robben Ford. So I've kept that short for demo purposes, and I'll tab out the few bars that I played there for you, give you the backing tracks that I used in the lesson today. The main thing is just to get comfortable. I mean, it goes by still kind of quick, so you got to get comfortable moving from that pentatonic scale into the diminished scale, and then right back into the pentatonic scale again. And again, that's in the style of Robben Ford. I don't want to be misleading here. I wasn't playing like Robben Ford, obviously. This is just what I meant in the style of this is how he applies the diminished scale. And if you learn how to do this, this will be a way for you to get some fresh sounds into your blues playing and break out of the pentatonic thing a little bit. So I've got one more lesson that I want to come back with here in a few days with a little bit more in terms of application of the diminished scale and some other places where you can apply this scale, and a couple of my favorite diminished licks. So look for that in a few days. In the meantime, enjoy this lesson. If you got any questions, be sure to leave them and I'll do my best to get back to you. And have fun. Get these new sounds in your ear, and I'll see you the next time around.